Explain to what extent Steve Biko and the Black consciousness philosophy inspired Black people to empower themselves against apartheid in the 1960s and 1970s. To answer this essay question effectively, follow this structured approach. 1. The introduction. In the introduction, begin with a brief historical context by explaining that the 1960s and 1970s were a period of deep apartheid oppression in South Africa. Clearly express your stance by briefly stating your argument. For example, make it clear that this essay argues that Steve Biko and the Black consciousness philosophy had a profound impact on Black empowerment, though this influence was limited by state repression and the BCM's organizational shortcomings. 2. Background. Provide relevant background on apartheid and explain the rise of the Black consciousness philosophy. Mention that the banning of the African National Congress and the Pan-African Congress during this time created a political vacuum. Introduce Steve Biko and the rise of the Black consciousness movement, BCM, highlighting that Biko and the BCM emerged in this period. 3. The body. Discuss how Biko's ideas became a tool of empowerment for Black South Africans to continue resisting apartheid. Describe Black consciousness as a philosophy that focused on psychological liberation, Black pride, and grassroots empowerment. And explore the extent to which Steve Biko and the Black consciousness philosophy inspired Black people to empower themselves socially, politically, and psychologically against apartheid. Structure the body into clear thematic paragraphs, each focusing on a specific area where Steve Biko and the Black consciousness philosophy inspired Black empowerment. Use key events, organizations, and examples from the 1960s and 1970s to support each theme. Focus on different types of empowerments, social, political, and psychological, and explain how Biko's philosophy played a role in each. 4. Evaluate how effective and lasting that empowerment was and present a balanced account of how far their inspiration went. Acknowledge the limitations and challenges BCM faced, such as lack of centralized leadership, limited collaboration with other anti-apartheid groups, and the heavy state repression, including Biko's death in police custody in 1977. 5. The conclusion. Conclude with a balanced evaluation of how effective and lasting the empowerment inspired by Biko and Black consciousness was. Present a clear judgment on how far their influence reached and how it contributed to the broader anti-apartheid struggle. Here is the full essay. Steve Biko and the Black consciousness philosophy were central to inspiring Black South Africans to resist apartheid during the 1960s and 1970s. This movement gave rise to a new political and psychological awakening among Black people, who were previously paralyzed by oppression and fear. In a context where traditional Black political organizations had been banned and silenced, Black consciousness emerged as a force that reignited resistance from within. This essay takes the position that Steve Biko and the Black consciousness philosophy significantly influenced the mindset and actions of Black South Africans, creating a foundation for renewed resistance during a time of silence and repression. It carefully analyzes historical developments, the Black consciousness philosophy, and evidence from the period to show how deeply Biko's ideas inspired Black South Africans to empower themselves against apartheid in the 1960s and 1970s, despite the brutal crackdown on anti-apartheid movements by the racist regime and the organizational shortcomings of the Black conscious movement. The background. In the early 1960s, South Africa entered a period of intense state repression. Political resistance from established liberation movements was severely disrupted as key leaders were imprisoned or exiled. This left a political vacuum, particularly among Black youth and intellectuals, who sought new ways to resist apartheid. It was within this context that Steve Biko emerged as a key figure, leading the development of the Black consciousness movement, BCM. This philosophy aimed to restore Black pride, psychological liberation, and self-reliance among Black South Africans, laying the ideological foundation for a renewed and assertive resistance against apartheid in the decades that followed. Steve Biko and the philosophy of Black consciousness played a pivotal role in inspiring Black South Africans to empower themselves and resist the apartheid regime on multiple levels. One of the most significant ways this was achieved was through psychological liberation and the restoration of cultural pride. At a time when apartheid policies were designed to dehumanize Black people, Black consciousness instilled a renewed sense of self-worth, cultural identity, and self-belief. Black South Africans were encouraged to reject the inferiority complex, self-pity, and domination imposed by white society. Instead, they were urged to love themselves, embrace their African identity, and take pride in their natural features, rejecting the use of skin lighteners and straightening of hair, which symbolized internalized self-rejection. This internal transformation empowered individuals to see themselves not as helpless victims, but as active agents in their own liberation. Biko's emphasis on psychological freedom laid the foundation for political activism rooted in pride and dignity. Building on this mental and emotional awakening, Black consciousness went on to shape the formation of political organizations that openly challenged apartheid. A key development was the creation of the South African Students' Organization, SASO, in 1968, which broke away from the white-dominated National Union of South African Students, NUSAS. SASO, under Biko's leadership, adopted BC principles and mobilized university students to resist white domination. This student-led activism inspired similar movements in high schools, such as the South African Students' Movement, SASM, formed in 1972. These student movements spread the philosophy to younger generations and eventually contributed to the founding of the Black People's Convention, BPC, which brought together a broader alliance of students, churches, trade unions, and community groups, all united under the BC banner. The formation of organizations like the Black Parents Association and the Black Allied Workers Union, BAWU, further demonstrated how Black consciousness philosophy inspired political mobilization across various segments of Black society. Events like the Viva Frelimo rallies in 1974, organized by SASO and the broader Black consciousness movement, exemplified this growing political energy. Even when BC leaders were arrested, their imprisonment only intensified resistance, showing how deeply the movement had taken root. This ideological foundation was especially visible during the 1976 Soweto uprising, which became a powerful expression of the confidence and political awareness instilled by Black consciousness. The immediate cause of the protest was the enforcement of Afrikaans as a compulsory language of instruction in Black schools. However, the students' organized response reflected the deeper influence of BC. Many had been exposed to BC ideas through SASO-trained teachers and student networks. These influences helped establish the Soweto Students' Representative Council, SSRC, which coordinated a peaceful march on the 16th of June, 1976. When police opened fire on the protesting students, killing 13-year-old Hector Peterson and others, the uprising turned into a national flashpoint. The uprising was more than opposition to a language policy, but a politically charged act of defiance rooted in the belief that Black people had the right to define their own identity and future. Many students fled the country afterward, taking BC principles with them and spreading the movement into exile. While youth and student activism captured national attention, Black consciousness also emphasized grassroots empowerment and self-reliance within Black communities. After being banished to King Williamstown, Biko redirected his efforts toward community development, putting BC principles into practice through the establishment of Black community programs. These included healthcare facilities like the Zanempilo Health Clinic and Solempilo Community Health Center, educational initiatives such as the Ginsberg Educational Trust, and economic support organizations like the Zamela Trust Fund. These projects offered practical alternatives to state dependency, promoting the idea that black communities could uplift themselves without relying on white support. By providing essential services and training, these programs empowered people at the local level and demonstrated that the fight against apartheid could be waged through community action, as well as political protest. The influence of black consciousness extended even further, reaching into the labor sector, where it inspired black workers to organize and resist economic exploitation. Workers who had long been marginalized began to see themselves as part of the broader liberation movement. The formation of the Black Allied Workers Union, BAWU, provided a platform for labor resistance aligned with BC ideology. This was clearly seen in the 1973 Durban strikes, where black workers demanded better wages and working conditions. These mass strikes disrupted the economic foundations of apartheid and proved that BC's call to action resonated beyond universities and townships. It energized the working class, giving them a political language and vision for collective action. Another vital aspect of black consciousness was its use of media to combat apartheid propaganda and spread its empowering message. In a country where the mainstream media was heavily censored and biased, BC-aligned publications, such as the World newspaper and Thrust magazine, offered black South Africans a new perspective. These platforms promoted psychological liberation, unity, and self-worth, providing readers with stories that uplifted and affirmed their identity. By creating media content that countered the apartheid narrative, the BC movement enabled black South Africans to reclaim their voices and create a shared sense of purpose and solidarity. The message was consistent across all levels of society: liberation begins in the mind. This strategy empowered people with the tools to believe in their own power and take action. Despite its powerful ideological impact, the Black Consciousness Movement, BCM, faced serious limitations that reduced its broader influence during the 1960s and 1970s. While Steve Biko's vision succeeded in awakening black pride, dignity, and a renewed sense of identity, the movement struggled to convert this psychological liberation into a coordinated and lasting political force. Its decentralized structure lacked the national leadership and strategic coherence seen in movements like the ANC, making it difficult to organize sustained resistance or respond effectively to state repression. Independent affiliates often acted in isolation, and once key leaders were banned or arrested, the movement lost direction and momentum. Furthermore, the BCM's refusal to build alliances with white activists or multiracial groups, though rooted in its ideology of self-reliance, limited its capacity to broaden the anti-apartheid coalition. This isolation made it harder to withstand the state's crackdown, which intensified with the banning of BCM organizations and the death of Biko in 1977. Without a strong institutional foundation or succession plan, the movement could not regroup. Though its influence lived on in the consciousness it awakened and in future movements, the BCM's practical political impact during its peak years was ultimately undermined by structural weaknesses and its inability to adapt under pressure. In conclusion, Steve Biko and the philosophy of Black consciousness played a transformative role in reigniting resistance during a time of political silence and repression in South Africa. By restoring a sense of identity, pride, and psychological liberation, the movement inspired a new generation of Black South Africans to challenge apartheid in their schools, communities, and workplaces. It laid the ideological groundwork for future resistance and contributed meaningfully to the broader liberation struggle. Though the movement was limited by organizational weaknesses and severe state repression, its legacy of Black consciousness endures, reminding us that true liberation starts within and that reclaiming dignity is a vital step toward freedom.